God will answer your question and still give you a rebuke, but he'll still answer your question. You remember the disciple Thomas, when Thomas says, I will not believe he has risen unless I can put my hands in the nails. And I see that. And so when he encounters Thomas, he says, Thomas, look, come, touch me. Come and touch me. And then he says, blessed is he who receives without seeing. So he gives him a little bit of a rebuke, but he still responds to his need and he responds to his question. And when we bring our questions to God, God will respond to our questions. So, the Bible talks about many are called, but few are chosen. And I believe one of the things that moves from being the called to the chosen is connected to our response. It is connected to our response. When God gives us an invitation, one of the things I say in our church on a regular basis, the kingdom advances by invitation. The kingdom advances by invitation. God is a master of giving invitation. Follow me. That's an invitation. And so according to how we respond, my friend Greg House talks about the fact we are marked by our response. We are marked by our response. If there is no response, a lot of times you will not see advancement. But when we hear the voice of God and we begin to respond to the voice of God, God begins to move us forward. All right. So, several things I want to on this issue about ministry identification. So when I said this is the Apostle Paul, who is the author of this. And one of the reasons he knows about this so well, because that's what happened to him. When we see the Apostle Paul, when he comes on the scene, he is a Pharisee. He does not call himself an apostle. He calls himself a Pharisee. And one of the reasons he's calling himself a Pharisee is because there was a passion and there was a realistic call of God on his life. And so if you were serious about the things of God in that generation and that culture, you would study and you would become a Pharisee. And as Paul, at that point in time, he's Saul, and he is functioning as a Pharisee, and he is killing Christians until he meets Jesus. When he meets with Jesus, what happens? All of a sudden, Jesus reveals, or Jesus appears, and the call of God is revealed in Paul. And now, Paul is now saying, when you look at this passage in Timothy, he no longer identifies himself as a Pharisee. He recognizes he is an apostle. And many times we're not aware that there are certain limitations that try to put upon us in our culture. When I grew up in church, when I started getting serious about the call of God on my life, I began to recognize there was a call. But at the church that I went to at that point in time, the only kinds of ministry we recognized was the pastor, the teacher, and the evangelist. And so none of those were my primary calling. And so because that's what we recognized, all of a sudden I tried to fit into something else. And so one of the things, so then what I said is, I know I'm not this, I know that I must be an evangelist. Must be an evangelist. There is so little of an evangelist in my life. But because this was the culture that I was raised in, I tried to fit into that culture until I went to another church and they started talking about fivefold ministries. And one day the senior pastor called me out and he said, "You are a prophet of God." And when he said that, everything inside of me began to jump, because it was like, that is what I am. And so as things are being revealed in this church, one of the things you will begin to find out is more and more God will begin to speak to you about your place in the body of Christ. All right. So Paul recognized he was not a Pharisee. He was an apostle. And this is all this portion when we're talking about the appearing of Jesus happens through a variety of methods. This appearing helps us to discover grace and calling. So that happened with Paul on the Damascus Road. It happened with Abraham. Abraham responds to the voice of God, but he must get away from family and friends in order to embrace his call. It's almost like God is saying, I got to pull you away from where you have been in order for you to hear my voice. And you'll even see Abraham will take his culture and where he has been with him. That's the reason there is Hagar. And that's the reason you have Ishmael. Why? Because Abraham is reaching back to where he was at. And now he's trying to mix it with what God is doing. And one of the things is, even when you begin to look at the word Babylon, Babylon is confusion by mixture. And many times the adversary knows if he comes just, where he just shows off. And it looks like this is so not like God. You'll never embrace it. But he brings confusion by mixture. And he'll put a mixture in. If you would go to, let's say you go to New Orleans. You go to New Orleans and you'll see fortune tellers and all kinds of things along the streets. And one of the major things is when they begin to talk to you about giving you or telling you your fortune, they'll also put a scripture in there.